Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final dynamic dialogue for 2021. Many of you are probably like me and not that unhappy to see 2021 close out. It's been an interesting year for a lot of people and for many companies. And so today we're going to talk about not supplier strategies because this didn't get updated, but we're going to talk about what's ahead for 2022. So this is our dynamic dialogue webinars. We've been doing these twice a month. So I started these in 2020, about the time the pandemic started. We were doing weekly. This year we went to twice a month. Next year, we're going to actually do one webinar a month, and then I'm going to do some articles and blogs. So you'll be on the receiving end of those, and a few more workshops. So hopefully that'll be there. So we'll have a new schedule for 2022. It is going to be the second Tuesday of the month. So it says the second, but it's really the second Tuesday. And there'll be a new link. So look for that in the next couple of weeks. So our next meeting will be on January 11th. So let's talk about 2021 and before we jump into 2022. And this is very, very high level highlights or maybe lowlights. So when we started in January, COVID was going strong. We had vaccines that were initially available. The very end of 2020, they were becoming more and more available into 2021. So we had a lot of cases of COVID. January was a pretty rough month for the infections and the deaths, and then the vaccines seemed to kick in and help out a lot with that. But also January was the first inkling we got of the real impacts of the semiconductor shortage. Many companies had seen that and they were dealing with issues, but we actually saw reports of factories, mostly car companies, being shut down or greatly reducing their production levels in January. So it started the end of 2020, but we really started to hear about it and see it and maybe even feel it in the first part of 2021. China had a workforce lockdown. Again, they're very much striving to control the coronavirus. So they had locked down their workers. That made things a lot slower. And about that time, we saw lumber prices kind of jumping through the roof. So there's a lot of other things going on as well. And then I'm going to jump to today, where we have shipping containers backlogged here in both ports, the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach. Shipping rates have doubled, tripled, and sometimes I've heard quotes of people paying 10 times the shipping rate that they were paying a year ago. We have driver issues with truck issues, not being able to unload the containers because there's too many containers in the way. We've seen different things happen throughout the year, including Chicago at one time actually shut down their rail to take any more containers in because they said they had too many. So a lot's happened between January and December. We had a Delta variant in there in between. That Delta variant is still surging in some parts of the country and the world, but now we're seeing an Omicron variant. I'm hearing different stories about how severe that is, but it's still something to keep an eye on. Today we know that fuel prices are crazy, food prices are crazy, lots of other prices are through the roof. It seems like a lot more than it was a year ago. Holiday shortages, some people are crying that they can't get the toys they want, the gifts they want for their family, and they're hoping to be back together in person this year where they haven't been before. And we know that now supply chain and supply chain crisis is a big buzzword. People all over the world and all over the country, including my family, who always wondered, what the heck does she mean when she says she's in supply chain? I think they have some inkling, although I'm not sure it's actually correct. And also in between, we had things like the Delta variant and resurgence of need for PPE and a lot of other equipment. We had that ship stuck in the Suez Canal that slowed a lot of things down, and people thought, well, who cares? It's not here, it's not helping, it's not hurting, but it did. It hurt a lot of things and started a lot of the issues with transportation. And we've seen the quote, great resignation. So many people have quit their jobs from all over the country, changed jobs. Some are changing careers. This affects supply chain a little bit, but it affects so many other industries and professions. It's really an issue. I know a lot of companies are struggling to hire and to hire good people. I know a lot of good people who are struggling to find the right companies and to get the right kind of pay that they feel. People are leaving to live in different areas. They're selling their homes, shutting their homes down, doing different things in order to live in an area where they don't have the commutes and they don't have the travails of living in some of the cities that they were working in. And companies are really struggling with how to deal with the work from home versus the in office. A lot of companies had said our return to office is in the fall of this year, and a lot of those, and most of those, I don't know any company who really fully executed their return to work. They said, yes, we have some return to work, but many are doing hybrids and many are just kind of juggling to see which is going to be the best thing to do for the next few months. So a lot of consternation, a lot of things on a lot of people's minds. So we hear a lot about the disruptions in supply chain. And I found this statistic that shows the regions that are hardest hit by the supply chain disruptions. So this is the percentage of companies reporting either moderate to severe supply chain disruptions due to the pandemic. Now, here in the US, we talk about this a lot and we think that it's mostly us that's been affected. But this statistic was really interesting, although they grouped Europe together as a whole, which I'm not sure I completely agree with. But as you can see, 72% of the companies in China had reported moderate to severe supply chain disruptions. 58% of the companies in Europe, 41% in Korea and South Korea and Japan, 36% in the US, so only a little over a third, and then Mexico and Canada a little less than us, not even quite a third. So the disruptions have been everywhere and they've affected companies around the globe. We here in the US feel like it's mostly us, but maybe it's not just mostly us. So there's a lot of other people that are feeling pain or have been feeling pain from all of the disruptions over the course of this year. In particular, companies, they don't have Taiwan on here, but Taiwan is one of the larger semiconductor companies. And so whereas they have the benefit of having people clamoring for parts, they have the challenge of not being able to produce them nearly quickly enough. So what did COVID actually contribute this year? We still talk about this live real time because it is live in real time. I just got my booster shot in the last month. I'm talked to my family who's doing the same thing. We're still, the 10-year-old next door got his shots. He was very happy to have that second shot, felt much better because of that, because now the 5 to 12-year-olds can get the shots. So it's moving forward in that, and it's still foremost on a lot of people's mind. And I think that COVID really exposed a lot of weaknesses in these global supply chains. I don't think it was the whole cause of everything, but it did definitely expose a lot of weaknesses. And that was a year and a half ago, and we're still not finished looking at those and uncovering those risks and putting mitigations back and solutions back. What we found is that global trade overall had a high reliance on low-cost manufacturing. It's particularly China. Now, I've worked in and around Asia manufacturers for a long time, and there's a lot of countries besides China that do low-cost manufacturing, but that has been highlighted during the pandemic, and I think COVID helped contribute to that. We've seen a very uneven workforce. At first, we had the shutdowns and only essential workers were allowed to even be at work. Now there are people going back to work. The work from home was one of those things that we all said that could never happen. It can never work well. And we found that it can work very well for a lot of companies and a lot of people. Other people not so well. There's a big disparity between the people who love the work from home and who really would like to be back in the office to have that structure. Some companies have found workers very productive, even more productive working from home. Other companies have found that workers may not be as productive, may not be able to contact who they need to contact, may need more supervision than other types of workers. And so we're seeing a lot of different reports on just how effective or disruptive the working from home is, and people's choices in where they'd like to work, again, has a lot of settling to do. We have an overall environment of uncertainty about what's going to happen. COVID has made people skeptical of things that they weren't skeptical about before, and those that were skeptical has made them maybe even a little more cynical. For myself, I never dreamed we'd have a pandemic in this country that would be one of the worst hit countries in the world in case of something like this, but that's where we find ourselves. And part of that, and no small part, is strife over not only vaccine requirements, but mask requirements and distancing requirements, and the ongoing fighting or infighting or whatever it is over how bad it really is, the fake news, what's created by people and what's true. So it seems to me that it's unfortunate that we're to that point, but that's where we are, and that makes that a very hot button subject for many people. And I know they've talked about it around Thanksgiving with people getting together for the Christmas holidays. They'll be talking again. What do you do if someone in your family feels differently about this? And how do you deal with that if someone's unvaccinated and you prefer vaccinated people? So there's a lot of consternation and strife still going on about this. So let's look at some of the trends that we expect for 2022. There are labor constraints and there are shortages of labor. So this is, again, not only here in the United States, it's around the world. There's a lot of challenges with that. And yet, like I say, I know a lot of people who are looking to change jobs and aren't finding the jobs that they would like to find in order to land there. So it's a hard thing to match that up. The skills that are required are hard to define in some cases, and some people feel they have skills that maybe their employers don't. So there's a lot of constraints around the labor. The demand is uncertain. So there's a lot of talk about the demand coming roaring back, and in other cases, it's not so roaring back. We're finding shortages on some parts, surplus of others, but companies are not really sure what the demand is going to be or what that demand is going to look like. So, for example, one of the reasons that I've seen cited for the automobile semiconductor issue is that the auto manufacturers felt people were going to migrate more to electric vehicles more quickly than they have done that. And they thought that the demand for the fossil fuel cars would ebb and wane a little bit, but that doesn't seem to be happening. They also didn't feel that the demand for new cars in general would come back as strongly as it did. So people are still looking for cars, and so the demand is hard to predict. Although that's one of the things I've seen written in the last few weeks of the articles I'm looking at is companies need to do a better job forecasting. My own opinion is that companies do the best job they can in forecasting. If they could do a better job, they would. So to increase their accuracy is not an easy thing to do. We've seen disruptions in lots of supply chains, not only from the ports, but from lots of other different reasons, including quality issues, including worker issues and capacity. So that demand uncertainty is going to keep those disruptions probably coming for the next few months. We are seeing a lot of interest in circular supply chains and more sustainability efforts. These two things kind of go hand in hand. Circular supply chains are finding all the waste and finding ways to turn that into a revenue stream. So whether that's through recycling, reusing, reselling, or whatever, that's a big trend. Was a big trend starting with 2019, and in 2020, a lot of the larger companies said that that was one of their main goals, was to start looking at circular strategies for their supply chains. That got kind of deflected and deferred by this pandemic. But now I think in 2022, we're going to see a resurgence of that. That plus the emphasis on climate change and the weather issues we're seeing. I'm sitting here in Southern California where it never rains, and it has been raining and actually pouring here for the last probably 12 hours or more. And it's supposed to go through today and not continue and not stop. So it's going to continue, which is a little unusual for us. We're grateful for the rain because we really need it, and that puts the risk of fires way down, but it is an unusual thing. We've seen long lead times since the pandemic began. Those are sometimes 2-3 times what they were pre-pandemic, along with the shortages, and those are going to continue. It's not going to be everything. It's going to be certain items at certain times, but the lead times overall, I think, are going to remain longer. The transportation, again, the things at the port, the containers, the rail, the trucks, all of that is going to be, right now, that's in a lot of flux and in a lot of confusion. And I think that's going to be there for a while, and it's going to drive cost. Trade imbalances, especially when we talk about China and the US, that's always the one that gets the spotlight, even though there are trade imbalances other places, and there are trade surpluses with between the United States and some countries that we don't discuss very often, or you have to kind of dig to find that data. So the sustainability, again, along with the circular supply chains, is a big topic. And of course, responsiveness, flexibility, agility, elasticity, all those words about how we make our supply chains more responsive and more able to handle things like these disruptions. Not necessarily the whole pandemic, but these disruptions and issues like the chip shortages, or the increased prices in lumber that was there, or the freeze in Texas that wreaked havoc in the chemical world for a while and is still not completely settled back. So all of those things, I think companies have realized they really have to be more responsive and flexible. And then objectives and key results is a term from a book, Measure What Matters, by John Doerr, D-O-E-R-R. It's an interesting book. It's a great book. And we're seeing companies embrace that, the objectives and key results, versus what we used to do with a lot of basic metrics and the key performance indicators. So we're seeing some changes in how we manage the business as well. So here's some predictions between January and June. So these are predictions that I compiled looking at what a lot of other pundits and supply chain gurus are saying. The trade impacts, they're going to remain pretty strong, especially because we've got the Chinese New Year shortly after the new year starts, 2022. So that always has wreaked havoc on things, but companies were able to manage that after a while. But I think that's going to exacerbate the pain that we're already feeling. I think that's going to lessen in Q2 and get better by the end of the second half, but we'll talk about that in just a second. I think demand for goods is going to remain high. And some of that I feel is artificially high, and that demand is going to exceed the supply that's available. I say artificial because I still believe that some individuals and some companies are in a bit of a hoarding mode. So they're ordering more than they need because they're not sure they can get what they need. So they're placing multiple orders for things with the intent of getting enough. And if they have a little bit extra, they'll just hang on to that inventory for a while. So I think that's artificially inflating the overall demand, which is greatly exacerbating more supply chains. So I think that's going to continue for the first half of next year. These shortages in chips, some of the PPE and some of the other areas where we have shortages, those are going to continue. I don't see that letting up in the near term. What we've seen along with these shortages is that consumer loyalty and trust has been eroded. So the shortages cause companies, as I said before, to order more than they need because they don't think they're going to get what they order. So if they need 100, they order 150, thinking that, well, maybe I'll get 2/3 of that order, or maybe I'll order 200, thinking that maybe I can get 50% of my order filled. So we're seeing that. So the customer loyalty, customers are placing orders with multiple companies. They're trying out suppliers they haven't tried before, and they don't trust the suppliers that they've worked with for years to give them honest answers on what they're going to be able to deliver. So in some cases that's warranted, in other cases maybe not, but I think that we are seeing a lot of challenges in those relationships at this point. And companies are investing in improving customer experience because customers don't necessarily like to be on backlog or like to be in limbo about when they're going to get their goods. So their suppliers are actually trying to find ways that they can assure the customers that they're going to be tended to and that their needs are going to be met at some point. But there's a lot of strategies involved in that, and that's a pretty complex issue. And those shortages not going anywhere is going to try everybody through the first half of next year. We've seen the Omicron variant of COVID pop up. Now there's other variants that we're hearing about in other parts of the world. So I think that's going to continue until we can get a higher vaccination rate in this country, which is going to either take care of that or not. Many people vaccinated are, hopeful that that will protect them, but with these different variants, and we found with the Delta variant, it was more resistant to the vaccines than we'd seen before. Hence, many of us have gotten booster shots in the last few weeks or months or are scheduled to get those. We are seeing some inventory start to be built back up, but they're not necessarily the goods that consumers want. So I think we're going to see that for a while too. We'll see inventories that are increased and stuff back on the shelves, but it might not be your first choice. So again, that customer loyalty and trust is going to get eroded when companies are building things, but they're not building the things that consumers actually want. We are seeing companies moving from survive to thrive modes, however. A lot of companies feel like they've got this far, they've managed from March of 2020, that for the last year and a half plus, and so they're feeling stronger. They're feeling like they can manage through this and they're actually going to survive. As we know, a lot of companies have not been able to survive this and are still dismantling or changing or have completely gone off the market, but others are moving to more of a thrive mode versus just all hands on deck to try to figure out how they can survive. And one of the ways they're looking at this is investing in more technology tools, more upgrades, and things like ransomware and some of the issues that we've seen in the last year, even with retail companies and these assaults on the companies where there's 14 people that break into the store and grab all the goods they can and run, the grab and go kind of things. The technology around that has to change, and then companies are saying, okay, if that's where my inventory is going, how do I protect it to get it there and make sure that it's protected throughout that supply chain up until that very last point. So it's changing that. We've also seen a lot of companies invest in ERPs and MRP systems where they didn't want to spend the money before, because now they've realized that that's going to help them be flexible and manage that whole demand forecasting thing better. So we're seeing a lot of those kind of mid-range tools in MRP and ERP being incorporated more into more and more companies. For the last half of 2022, experts are saying, and I agree, that consumer demand is going to be a little more normalized, which means the reduced hoarding and the fear-based purchasing is not going to be as strong, which I think is a really good thing. I think that will help the whole Q2 a little bit, or second half of the year 2022. Employment policies, I think companies are going to start to figure out that they're going to have to do some of this hybrid or work from home policy setting. So companies that were adamant that no, we're going to get back and we're going to all be back on site by September of 2021, and that didn't happen. I think they're going to relent and say, okay, we can have this much work away, or we need to have this many people on site to do X, Y, Z. So I think that's going to get settled out in the next 6 months, and that the second half of 2022, companies are going to be more comfortable with their policies and have more policies that can remain a little more consistent. Inventories are going to increase. So again, it may not be all of the goods that are highly desired, but I think inventories in general are going to increase because production capacities are going to increase. We're going to ease some of the shipping issues, which is going to reduce some of the bottlenecks, and that's going to help. I think the semiconductor issues and of course the products that contain those semiconductors are still going to have challenges through the end of 2022. I think it's going to be 2023 before we see a real ease in a lot of those areas. There's other kinds of issues that I think are going to get settled out. The chemicals that are still a little bit going crazy. I think the gas prices, gasoline prices are going to come back down in the first half of 2021. At least I hope they do. And the overall prices are going to be lower. So I think the food prices that we've seen increased and a lot of those other things, that's going to settle down and definitely be back to a lower level than today in the last half of 2022. And I think that's, again, because companies are going to be more comfortable with what they're ordering. They're going to not be hoarding as much or have those fear-based purchases. And I think productivity is increasing across the supply chain as companies figure out what return to work means and they work through their protocols for social distancing, mask wearing, vaccines, all of those things. You're going to see a lot of productivity increases that start in the first half and really go well into the second half of 2022. So I think companies can take steps to address these challenges and mitigate these impacts. And the first thing I think they need to do is really recalibrate their strategies. How are they managing that? Focus on stability, focus on growth, again, rather than being in that survive mode. I think they're going to move more toward that thrive, and that's going to change the strategies and the approaches that they take in different instances. They're going to rationalize the products that they offer, how many SKUs they offer, the product families. I'm starting to see companies do that now. If you followed Coke at all, Coke is cutting out a ton of product offerings. I think the number is like 200. But I heard the CEO of Coke, and he said it's really less than about 5% of their revenue generating products. So they've been offering a lot of different products, but they're not making revenue on it. So if Coke is doing that kind of rationalization, then you can bet a lot of other companies are doing the same. So it's the same kind of idea to really say, where do I need to put my resources? I have X number of resources. Where are they going to go? So people that like certain products are going to be unhappy, but there's a lot of other choices in the meantime. So their number of products are still going to be very broad, coming from Coke and a lot of other companies. Quantifying the cost within the supply chain, again, in those of us in the supply chain profession have talked for years about total cost of ownership and adding all those costs up, but it's been very price focused. I think now companies are really starting to look at that total cost of ownership. All of the changes, all of the dynamics in there, including things like how fast we can get things, how much inventory is on a boat, wherever that is, what the supply chain length is, as well as the time and the price paid for the unit is going to, and the quality and all these other issues. I think that's really going to be more in vogue. And I think that's a really good thing. So I think companies have started doing that more. Again, I've espoused that for years, but I'm actually seeing companies start to do that. Again, the supply chain architecture, where are you located? Where are your, not only your suppliers, your tier 1, but your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers? I always go back to the February and March of 2020, when I talked to several colleagues and they said, well, you know, we think this is primarily a China influence and we don't really buy that much from China, so we don't expect it to hurt our business. And then 3 months later, when I talked to them, they said, wow, we had no idea all of these parts, not that our suppliers buy, come from China or from other parts in Asia. So they got kind of a rude awakening from that. So I think that whole architecture thing, analyzing that, mapping that, knowing exactly where your suppliers are, and being more deliberate in the whole architecture of the supply chain is going to be more important. And then trying to optimize. Once you do that analysis, really figuring out how you can optimize. And I hear a lot of people say, well, we should just quit producing in China. But those of us, again, in supply chain and procurement know you don't just turn those faucets off one day and turn them on somewhere else the next day. So it takes some planning and some work to move. If you want to move out of China, that's a good strategy. Again, that goes back to the first thing I said about recalibrating your strategies. But then you have to say, where are we going to produce and what is that going to do to that total cost of ownership? And how is that all going to play in? So it becomes an optimization activity, and that takes planning and time to put the plan together, and then it takes time to execute. All of that has risks in it. And so I think companies are still looking for more risks. They, like I say, the pandemic uncovered a lot, but I think there's still some there. And companies are still putting mitigation strategies to deal with those. There's a lot of open issues and constraints. We have to do that. Assurance of supply is always job one with a supply chain, making sure that we've got parts on order and parts coming in the door so we can make things and we can sell things and we can stay in business. Supplier management resources in the area of performance, risk management, relationship management, those are even more important, and making sure you have a staff that can do that is very key. And that includes things like business continuity plans, escalation plans with your suppliers, and that's all about those relationships. So I think all of that is going to be very, very important for companies to be moving forward into and through 2022. And I've talked about this a little bit, but I think really what companies are going to do that are going to get to that thrive mode more quickly is to try to build in this resiliency. That means you got to track supplier performance, whether you use OKRs or KPIs or whatever. You have to know how your suppliers are doing. The only way you know how suppliers are doing is if you give them very specific requirements and you give them expectations. And then you can say, this is what I expect. This is my requirement. How are we doing against that? If you don't have that bar set, then you can't really track the performance. Cost is one of those performance areas, but it's not the only one. But there are a lot of costs other than just the price we pay. As I've said before, that total cost of ownership comes in, and that includes things like how much do you pay for a staff that doesn't have the skills that you need. So you might have a nice small staff, but if you don't have the skills you need, what is the opportunity cost that you're missing because you don't have the right people in the right chairs to do the right work for you to stay ahead of this. Forecasting techniques, again, I've seen several articles that say, well, companies just need to improve their forecast accuracy. And again, I don't think that they are not trying to do that, but I think they're looking at more sophisticated methods. I think they're looking at not necessarily more mathematical models, but they're looking to incorporate both the history, the quantitative type of it, and then the qualitative. So what do they know about what's changing? And then how can they test that and make sure that their assumptions are correct and make those modifications? Again, I go back to the auto industry and looking at the electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are a good way to go, but I've talked to several people in the last actually in the last few weeks, who are either buying new cars or thinking about new cars. And all of them, and this is anecdotal, but all of them said they are interested in electric cars, but not yet. So two of the people I talked to are actually doing a lease agreements, which both of them said they've never done a lease before, but they're going to wait until they buy something to really figure this out. But the leasing is the way to go right now. So we're seeing a lot of different ways to forecast, I think, for companies to figure that out. Again, the focus on architecture, meaning where are my suppliers? Where are they? Where do I want them to be? What's the advantages of doing things in China, in Asia, in Mexico versus in the United States? And what are the penalties and how am I going to balance that out? Management of inventories. I think companies figured out they had either too much or not enough inventories. I've heard people be very negative about lean inventory policies, and I don't think lean was the issue. Maybe companies tried to be too lean in some cases. In other cases, maybe they weren't lean enough. And so I think just throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying we're never going to do lean again is not the right idea. I think it's really to figure out what you need and what's driving that, how the inventory is replenished, rather than just increase the inventory amounts. I have talked to several people, and in some cases they say, well, we're thinking about adding more safety stock. So adding safety stock can be a good thing to do, but if you don't do it for the right reasons, and if you do too much of it, then that can be a problem. So it ties up your cash. It makes your buyers have to manage the inventory a little more closely, even though you would think the opposite is true. Well, I've got safety stock, so I don't have to manage it as closely. You're looking at how much you have and how much over. If you have any kind of downturn in demand, your inventories with a lot of safety stock can balloon, and then you can end up with a lot of obsolete material. So it's not an easy thing to do. Again, supplier relationships, what worked, what didn't through the pandemic up to this point, which suppliers are really coming through, which relationships are working for you, and how you're going to foster those and improve those, and then break those that aren't working for you, that no longer serve you. And then finally, I think implementing more risk-based thinking and decision-making throughout the company is going to be a big help to a lot of different organizations as they realize that we're not going back to normal. The pre-COVID era is gone. What we're going to have is this new normal, whatever it looks like for your company, and that's how we're going to go forward. So it's been a tough year for a lot of people, and we thought 2020 was tough and thought, okay, this time next year we're going to be this and this and this. But here we are at the end of 2021, and it's not exactly what I expected. So I think it's probably the same for many of you. And people are getting tired and anxious, and they are looking for an easier 2022 than we've seen the last couple of years. But what I know for sure is there's a better way to approach this new year more than any other. Seeing the glass as half full, that's a positive attitude thing. I think there's a lot of opportunities that have come out of the pandemic. People who are now in the hybrid schedules and working from home and that like that have been very appreciative of that, especially for places like Southern California where our commutes can be awful. People have been able to change jobs and find jobs that are more suited to them, or maybe move and find a location where they prefer to live. So I think that's opened up a lot of opportunities, which I think is what we need to focus on. We've got lots of challenges, but we've always had challenges. So focusing on those opportunities is a good thing. Pragmatism, I say, is a friend. Be pragmatic about things. So opportunities are good, but that doesn't mean that you should have those rose-colored glasses on and see everything as wonderful, because it's not. There are challenges. So be pragmatic about how you address your challenges at work and in your own life. Stay informed. I think that's one of the things that I am going to espouse a lot in 2022 is pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world, in the US, in your industry, with your competition from your company and your competition in that industry, and in your profession. I think there's a lot of changes that are coming. Many of these can be positive, but you need to be aware of that and be prepared for that, which means you need to be flexible and you need to be adaptable and you need to be a good change agent. Companies, for my own company, I'm looking at my vision and mission, which I usually do every year, but it's more kind of a cursory thing. This year, I've actually set a day aside between the Christmas and New Year to really work on that and say, what do I want my business to be in 2022, and how do I want to see it this time next year? But one of the things that I think is really important is gratitude. I think it's a very important part of my day because I believe in taking time every day to express some kind of gratitude. Some days are easier than others, but in general, I have a lot to be grateful for. I have a family. I come from a big family, lots of brothers and sisters, and in many ways, that's very nice to have that to share challenges with. Living in Southern California is where I would rather live than anywhere else. So I'm very grateful to have my home here. I'm very grateful to be in my business with my clients and audiences like you that are listening to me today. Many companies didn't survive the pandemic, and the challenges of the last 2 years have been tough, but I'm still here. I'm striving for more, and I think you are too if you're listening. So I intend to thrive myself and my business in 2022 and exceed the results of the last 2 years. So I want to thank you all for your loyalty to these webinars, and like me, look for more and better in 2022. So I'm going to leave you with this strive to thrive, which is gratitude makes sense of your past. It can bring peace for today and creates a vision for tomorrow. So I think that is a good thing for us all to think about as we get into 2022. So if you'd like to talk more about supply chains in 2022 or any other supply chain, you can schedule a free call with Jane. It's just go to callwithjane.com and you can get a link to my calendar. You can look for our events on the website. We have exam 3 that's coming up for CPSM if you'd like to get certified. And if you would like to take a class in risk-based thinking, look for that in 2022 as well. We're going to do an hour and a half a week for 3 weeks, potentially 4 weeks, but I think we're going to keep it to 3 weeks. So for that, if you need CEHs, you get like 4.5 hours of that. Look out for the topics in 2022. That's what part of what I'm working on in my day of vision and mission, and what topics I want to bring into that. And you can contact me directly at jane@purpleink.net. So I wish you all happy holidays and a very happy, safe, healthy, and successful 2022.